John Lott, you must be a busy man today.
I've been up for a while this morning, that's for sure. Even got to do Piers Morgan again, only this time from he's in the UK. But it kind of brought up back memories from all the times I was on his show after the gun control push a few years ago when he was on CNN.
Well, I saw you guys were having a big fight on Twitter.
Really? Okay, I don't know. He never responds to the stuff on Twitter. I guess I'll have to look to see what he had to say.
Well, he's saying what everyone's saying, which is a lot of shoulds. And I agree with shoulds. That a psycho shouldn't have an AR-15. The real question is when you get into the nuances of how you can prevent a should.
Right. I mean, that's, I wish it was an easy solution to something like that. What you find is that about half the mass public shooters during the Obama administration were actually seeing psychiatrists or psychologists before they engaged in their attacks. And yet, in not one single case, did any of those mental health experts identify those individuals as either a danger to themselves or others. In fact, there's a whole literature in academic psychology about their inability to go and identify these individuals before they engage in these attacks. And part of the problem is just how incredibly rare these individuals are. On average, people with the mental illnesses are actually less violent than the general population, and they're also more likely to be victims of violent crime themselves.
Wow.
And so, it's you have to be a little bit careful in terms of trying to identify these individuals.
Now, what kind of gun did he have? It was a Ruger AR rifle?
Correct.
And that was illegal for him to own.
Well, that's not clear. In fact, often, as has been true for these cases, it looks like the initial media reports were wrong on it. This guy also had a job as a security guard, so it kind of raised some questions in my mind about whether or not the initial news reports were correct or not. He wasn't dishonorably discharged from the military. He was discharged for bad conduct, but that's not quite the same thing. And these initial notions about him having been engaged in domestic violence, I've been reading some new media accounts which indicate that may not be correct either. So in any case, this individual bought a gun from a gun store. It went through a background check. The federal background check passed him. If he had a dishonorable discharge, as far as I know, those have always been accurate in the past. The federal government links in with the military, that type of information. So you would think it would have been caught. And that's another reason why it indicated to me that maybe the initial news reports were wrong.
But even if he was dishonorably discharged, I'm dubious of the kind of parameters they have. I've heard that you can get that for sleeping with someone on base, all kinds of other reasons. It reminds me of these no-fly lists where it sounds reasonable, and then you find out half the people are there because they have funny names or some other stupid reason.
Right. I mean, you're exactly right. The no-fly lists, the terror watch lists have morphed to be unrecognizable from what they originally intended to be. Terror watch lists includes people simply now that the government wants to talk to. During the Obama administration, the size of the list increased by over tenfold. So, your real questions. In fact, people want to have the terror watch list to combat people from being able to buy guns, but you look back and everybody who was on the terror watch list who bought a gun, there's not one single crime apparently that was committed by any of those types of individuals who bought that. And so, you got to be careful about these things. As you say, they sound good. And in addition, the media has made a lot about Republicans opposing Democrats' push for terror watch lists to ban guns. But in fact, the media has done a very poor job of explaining to people the debate. The debate between the Republicans and Democrats was over what types of safeguards were there to protect people, to make sure you didn't have the very types of mistakes that you were just referring to, where the Republicans wanted the government to have to go to court to show to a special judge what evidence that it had that this individual should have been included on this watch list. And the Democrats wanting to have no review at all, wanted simply the bureaucrat. You could have simply right now have one bureaucrat put somebody on the list, and you're basically stuck on it then.
Right. You know, we were talking to Sonny Johnson today about blacks in the hood and how, you know, someone who was caught with a firearm and did their time wants to protect his family. Now the wife can't even have a gun in the home because he's now around a gun. And
Right.
It sounds like, once again, it's this tangled web we weave when we try to prevent these horrors.
Look, there's lots of costs to these gun control laws, and people ignore them, and I think at real peril for the safety of a lot of the most, victims in our society. So, for example, the big gun control measure that everybody keeps pushing after each of these mass public shootings, and they were pushing for it yesterday, within hours before they had any idea what had happened, was these universal background checks, these background checks on private transfers. Yet again, yesterday, it would have been irrelevant. In fact, I can't think of one mass public shooting in the last couple decades, at least, that this law, had it been in effect, would have stopped. But yet it keeps getting pushed, and yet it has real costs. So, for example, in Washington, D.C., it costs $175 to privately transfer a gun because of the background checks on private transfers. Now, there are other places in the country where it's cheaper. In Oregon, it's $55. But whether it's $55 or $175, that may not stop you or I from buying a gun, but a poor person, poor black who lives in a high-crime urban area, having that type of tax effectively on being able to purchase a gun may make the difference between whether or not they're able to legally defend themselves and their families. You look at the fact that virtually everybody who gets stopped by background checks is what they call a false positive. During the campaign last year, Hillary Clinton would go and say that there's 3 million dangerous, prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. Well, that's simply false. What she should say is that there have been 3 million initial denials, and that virtually all of those were false positives. It's something like 98, 99% of those were mistakes. They had somebody simply because they had a similar name to a felon. But stopping somebody just because they have a similar name isn't very useful. In fact, the people who get stopped again are a lot of the most vulnerable people in our society. People tend to have names similar to others in their racial group. So, for example, 40% of Vietnamese have the same last name in the United States. Hispanics have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other blacks. 30% of black males in the United States are legally prohibited from owning a gun because of past criminal records. Well, whose names are their names most likely to be confused with? Other law-abiding good black males.
Yeah.
When you buy a gun, you fill out what's called a 4473. You put your name down, your social security number, your height, your weight, your address, your social security number, your birthday. You think the government's using all that information. It's not. What they basically use is phonetically similar names and birthdays. So if you have somebody whose name is John with an H or John without an H, as far as the federal government is concerned, those are the same names. Or Smith with an I or Smith with a Y and an E, that's the same. And so it's not too surprising that you can get millions of people over time, just because you include the birthday, you're going to get mistakes that are there. And
of course. Okay, so we've established that background checks don't work, and that's a pipe dream. The next big liberal argument that I'm sure you'll be dealing with all day today is, why does such a gun exist? I'm here in New York City. I'm arguing with liberals all day, for the past 24 hours basically, and they all say, well, don't you agree that if this was just a it wouldn't have killed as many people as...
But if that's what it is a bang, bang, bang. It's not a machine gun. But when people confuse, they hear the term military style. Well, military style and military weapons are not the same thing. Military style are essentially hunting rifles on the inside that on the outside look like military weapons. Now, if they want to go and ban all semi-automatic hunting rifles, that at least would make logical sense. But just to go and ban some guns, like we did with the federal assault weapons ban from 1994 to 2004, based on how they look on the outside, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, you had Senator Feinstein, when she put her assault weapons bill together, they were going through and looking at catalogs of guns,
right,
and checking off names of guns based on how the guns look, whether they looked like a scary military weapon, not based on whether it actually functioned like a military weapon. The thing is, these so-called assault weapons that they try to go and ban aren't, no military in the world uses weapons like that. The militaries around the world use real machine guns, or at least guns that can have a mode of operation where they operate like a machine gun. And there are three types of guns. You have manually loaded guns where you fire a bullet and you have to physically put another bullet in the chamber of a gun.
right.
You have semi-automatic guns where one pull the trigger, one bullet comes out, it reloads itself, one pull the trigger, one bullet comes out. And then you have machine guns, which one pull the trigger, as long as the trigger is depressed, bullets will keep flying out until they run out of bullets in the gun. Look, civilians benefit from having semi-automatic guns. I mean, you may not, if you have two people that you're firing at or you miss at the first shot, you might not have the luxury of time to physically reload the gun after you fire it. And so, I assume Democrats still don't want to make the argument, other than a few bills that you see being proposed in California and Georgia and some other places, to actually go and ban all semi-automatic guns in the United States. Most guns in the United States are semi-automatics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's...
And that's what he had.
That's what he had. Right?
So we've got...
And that's what the guy who shot at him had. The individual who stopped the attack also had a semi-automatic.
The legal gun that stops the potentially illegal gun. So you've explained away the first two there, I think, pretty clearly, and that only leaves the but the is very hard to come by, and not part of mass shootings.
Right. Look, we have not in this country had a machine gun used in a mass public shooting, unlike a lot of Europe. You look at France. All the big attacks in France have involved machine guns. All the ones in 2015, where they had piled up 532 casualties in just 1 year, involved machine guns. The attacks in Belgium, the attacks in Germany, other places in Europe have involved machine guns. And yet, you're talking about countries such as France, where even semi-automatic guns are banned, let alone machine guns. The problem that you face in much of the world is that you have a much worse rate of mass public shootings than you have in the United States in terms of casualties and even in terms of rates. We don't hear about a lot of them. But you have really bad mass public shootings in the rest of the world. And it just illustrates, despite extremely strict gun control laws, how difficult it is, how hard it is to stop determined people from getting the weapons that they want to have to go and kill other people.
Well, the general argument from the left, and especially from Europeans, is America has all the guns, America has all the gun violence. Britain, Australia, we are these bastions of gun safety and gun-free zones, and we don't have your kind of deaths, which a lot of liberals say is upwards of 170 every couple days, 90 a day, I guess that is, roughly. But those are all gangsters with illegal handguns and suicides. I don't think it's a given that we have less. Is it a given that we have less gun violence than Germany, Australia, and Britain?
We have more total gun violence. Okay, there are a couple things, as you were just pointing out, that need to be emphasized. One is the United States has a bad drug gang problem, and if you look at murders in the United States, over half the murders in the United States take place in just 2% of the counties. And if you look at those counties and what's called a murder map, you're going to find that the majority of murders, even in that 2% of those counties, are in like 8 to 10 blocks.
Wow.
You basically have very tiny areas where you have a lot of drug gang violence that occurs.
But those are also illegal guns.
Right, well, sure. Well, here's the notion, and that is, look how much money we've spent trying to stop these gangs from getting illegal drugs to go and sell.
Right.
Do you think we'll be any more successful in stopping those gangs from getting guns? I mean, if I could click my fingers right now and cause all illegal drugs in the United States to disappear and all guns to disappear, how long do you think it'd be before illegal drugs started coming back into the United States?
Minutes.
Here in El
For
Paso,
both guns and
20
drugs
minutes?
would be minutes.
Right. And how long do you think it'd be before they bring in the weapons to protect that very valuable property? It's not like they can go to the police and say, look, this other gang stole our drugs. Can you help get them back? I testified before the Mexican Senate last December. They've been thinking about redoing some of their gun control laws. Right now in Mexico, there's one gun store in the entire country. It's run by the military. The highest caliber gun that they can sell is a 22 caliber gun. That's about the lowest caliber there is. There's
Right.
a few examples which are lower, but that's, for all practical purposes, that's the lowest. That's not the gun that the drug gangs use in Mexico.
No.
They use machine guns, and they're not getting their guns from the United States. They don't go to gun stores in the United States and buy machine guns. They have bazookas.
Well, wait a minute. They are getting some guns from the United States. Remember Fast and Furious? Thanks to Obama, they were getting plenty of guns from the United States.
Right? It's pretty small, okay? Now, you hear, for example, that they have found 90%, the Obama administration used this number all the time. They'd say 90% of crime guns in Mexico came from the United States. That's not really what the number showed. What they looked at is Mexico, out of all the guns that they confiscated, they checked 18% to see whether they were from the United States. And the reason why they did that is the United States is pretty much the only country that has serial numbers put on the guns.
Oh, right, yes.
And so when they find a gun with a serial number, they say, well, this is probably from the United States. We'll send it to the United States to check to see whether it's there. And 90% of the 18% came from the United States. But you're basically talking about 16% or so of the guns, of all the crime guns confiscated in Mexico, came from the United States. That's a relatively small portion, and it's not the machine guns and other stuff that they have a lot of trouble with in Mexico. The drug gangs, just as they go and bring in drugs from around the world into Mexico as kind of a stopping off point before they ship them to the United States, bring in weapons from around the world in order to protect that valuable property that they have.
Okay, last question. It's kind of a dumb one. But pretty much every family in America, every household has a fridge. Rich or poor, welfare, abject poverty, they have a fridge. Would America be better off? Would crime go down overall if every household in America had at least one gun?
I don't know. I mean, what I can tell you is I can look at the range of data that we have in the United States, the variation that we have. And I think it's pretty clear that the places in the United States that have increases in gun ownership have drops in violent crime rates. I'll give you one very simple example to illustrate this, and that is you see places that try to ban guns. We've had Washington, D.C., Chicago in the United States have tried to ban guns. You see other places in the world. I can't find a single place in the world that's tried to ban guns, either all guns or all handguns, and seen murder rates fall. I can't even find a place where murder rates have stayed the same. Every single place that's tried to ban either all guns or all handguns has seen an increase in murder rates, often very large increases that occur after that. You think out of randomness, you'd get one place where murder rates had either stayed the same or gone down. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. And that is when you pass a gun control law like that, it's primarily the most honest, good citizens who obey the law, not the criminals. And to the extent that you disarm law-abiding citizens relative to criminals, you actually make it easier for criminals to go and commit crime. And it's not just true for banning guns. You have to be careful that many of the different types of gun control laws that you try to push don't unintentionally disarm the most law-abiding citizens relative to the criminals. So when you go and you have these expensive background checks, well, guess what? It's the law-abiding citizen who goes out of their way to go and have a background check done on a private transfer of a gun.
Right.
The criminals aren't going to go out of their way to pay $175 in Washington, D.C. to go and have a transfer of a gun that's there. And so you make it so that it's the poor people, the very people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, poor blacks, who are priced out of being able to own guns to be able to go and protect themselves and their families.
You know, once again, you have the left, the liberals, the socialists, hurting the people they purport to help. The more they try to meddle, the worse off it is for the so-called victims.
Right. Look, it'd be great if the police could be there all the time. My research shows that the police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But you go and you talk to the police, you go and look at surveys of the police. The police understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occur.
Yeah.
And the question is, what should people do when they're having to defend themselves in that situation? And the police themselves are probably the strongest supporters of private ownership of guns in the United States because they know firsthand how important it is to have a gun to protect themselves. And they understand how important it is for private citizens to have that same option.
John, once again, the voice of reason in all this. And it's funny how every time there's a shooting, we basically have to get you back on the show and say very similar things because the left they can't get unstuck from these same arguments again and again. Why did he have that weapon? Why don't we have a background check? We should have not given him the weapon. And it's like saying, you know, that rapist shouldn't have had a penis. I agree with you, but there's no way to do it.
Look, there are a couple things here. One is I wish some of the media would say, look, you want to push these universal background checks? Please point to one mass public shooting that would have been stopped as a result of this rule. Right. Just one, okay? And the media doesn't ask that. The second thing is I have to say the media has become much more biased on gun issues in the last year than I've ever seen them before. I mean, it's much harder. I get calls from people at CNN who go and say things like, well, what would you argue on this? And I'm assuming that they're going to go and have me on the show. But no, what they want to do is they just want to know what topics I would raise and how I'd raise it. So then when they have the panel of just four people who all agree with each other, they can throw that out and say, well, you know, people on the other side will say X, what's your response? Right. And they mischaracterize it, and then they have a debate over nothing. And it just, you know, it just is strange. I've never really seen it quite this lopsided before in terms of the discussions. But, you know, CNN, MSNBC, they don't even bother. It's not 3-1 on a panel. It's 4-0 now that they're having in these discussions.
Right. Well, John, good luck. You're going to be hit with an onslaught of interviews over the next 24 hours, and I hope some logic seeps through.
Thanks for having me on. I'm glad you're out there.
Cheers, John.